All right, well, hello there. Got a little bit of a different approach than we have in the past, at least our congregation. I've been doing a lot of solo studies, a lot of pre-recorded videos. And so what I wanted to do is offer an opportunity for us to look at more of a group study, to kind of approach this from a different angle. And so I asked two of my good friends, Trey Haskett, who preaches in Tupelo, Mississippi, and Greg Kline, who preaches in Birmingham, Alabama, if they wanted to do a group study. And so we all decided that would be a productive thing to do. We'll share this with our congregations. And so we've known each other for a good long while now. We're all roommates in college, and now we're all preaching the word in our separate areas of the corner of the country. And so very excited to have both these guys with us today. Very excited to dive into a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. And so wanted to get something that was very practical, but also allows us to get some really good deep discussion in and some very good deep thoughts. And so I think it's going to be a great study. I think it's going to give us a lot of opportunity for self-edification and a lot of opportunity for us to really consider some of the practical realities, particularly of our current situation in a time where there is a lot of difficulty, where there is a lot of frustration with the current state of the world. I think the words of the preacher have a lot to say about this. And so very excited to get into a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Thank you guys for being here with me as well.
Yeah, nothing's more exciting than starting out a book that starts vanity of vanities.
We really wanted to give something super positive, something really upbeat, and so
bring us some hope in some otherwise dark times.
Right.
Trey, though, as we get into Ecclesiastes, I'm interested in your thoughts on, do you view this book as kind of more negative or more positive in its scope? I know that kind of goes both directions depending on who you talk to. How do you see it?
Yeah, for me, as I'm looking at the book, it seems like there's a couple of things going on that just reading surface level, it can be very depressing, listen, the book says everything is meaningless, that nothing really has a purpose. We're all going to die. So even things like wisdom and righteousness, at times the book, what the author is saying there is those things really don't matter to one extent. And so looked at that way, it does seem very negative. But one of the things that might be helpful as we frame the discussion here and as we think about the book is that, and whether you think this is one person who is just sort of at war with himself and sort of testing different ideas, or if he's trying to give really just two different perspectives. Here's one way to look at the world through sort of the humanistic mindset, looking at it from your own perspective. Everything looks meaningless. We really can't make much of it out. And looked at that way, the world really does look bleak. But from a different perspective, you come back and you see that the world is something, it's given by God, who is the creator. He's the one who has made everything the way that he has. And yes, it's a world broken by sin, and yet there's still good to delight in. And so we've got these sections that sort of punctuate the book that maybe seem to suggest something of a more positive tone that we can take away from it, rather than just, well, the world is the way it is, so let's just be okay with the vanity of it all.
I think that's a great point. One of the struggles that this writer is going to hit is something that I think we can relate to. In America, we're very blessed. And so a lot of times we kind of feel bad for being blessed when we put it into perspective to what others don't have. And really, the writer does make it clear on the positive end, enjoy what you have. Don't let it run you. Don't let it ruin you. But be thankful that God lets you work and enjoy the fruit of your labors. Because there's going to be times when you can't, and there's going to be others that can't, and that's okay. Now, on the other hand, there are some incongruencies in life, and that is, of course, one of the deeper struggles of this book is, what do I do when I'm doing good things, but it just seems hopeless? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to me sometimes, but not all the time? And if I'm going to work all this and enjoy all the fruits of my labors and then just die anyway, what's the point? Well, the point is God's going to be there. Unlike a book like Esther, you see God in here over and over. I think I saw a count of around at least 37 times, right? If this, but most importantly, God. And so there's this, don't get distracted, but how do we respond to it? Andrew, I think that's one of the interesting things here when it comes to the optimistic, pessimistic view is, how do we understand God working behind the scenes of all this complexity when life can seem really down or it can seem really great? How do we see God in that? And how does the writer challenge that throughout here?
I think that's one of the things that we see is that the Ecclesiastes author is not unique in questioning these things. He's not unique in saying that there's difficulties in life. There are times of frustration when you read the minor prophets. they're going to talk a lot about that. They're going to talk a lot about the injustice of the world, about how it seems like the evil prosper, and even secular sources talk about this. And you can read even something as well known as William Shakespeare in Macbeth. The title character says, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." Well, that sounds in some ways similar to what the Ecclesiastes writer is going to say when he says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Um, and in the surface level, it's very easy to see the wickedness of the world. It's very easy to see that the injustice of the world and bemoan the situation we find ourselves in, and do ask, what is the point of all of this? But the difference between something like Macbeth and something like Ecclesiastes is that the writer of Ecclesiastes recognizes there's something deeper than what we're seeing on the surface level. There's something more grandiose at play than just our human experiences. This is all part of a bigger picture. And so even if we can't take comfort in the small things, what we can take comfort in is the continual presence of the Creator. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is the structure of this. The preacher, kind of the main bulk of the book, is this teaching of this preacher figure. But the very conclusion of the book is going to be kind of this narrator who's compiled all of this. And that's really his conclusion when all things are said and done, is that the only thing you can really turn to in all these things is God, is to trust in Him, to obey His word, and to live your life to the best of those precepts. And so that's what ultimately the message of hope is going to be, is that there's more to this life than just what we see on the surface. There's God working in deeper ways.
Yeah, I think there's two elements here that are going to be really powerful and important. One is what you just said, the idea that no matter what happens, God is in control. God's who we look to, as he says at the end of the book, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. But also, we are going to have to deal with the life problems. And one of the things that's challenging, in a COVID-19 time, in toilet paper is not on sale at my local grocery store time, is I still got to deal with whatever the problem is, right? I can't just be like, well, God's got it, so he's going to Amazon Prime me, the toilet paper to the door. I still have to do some things, right? How do I deal with the problems I have? How do I deal with sadness? How do I deal with grief? How do I deal with positive times, happiness? And so when you look through this, you see there's a lot of surface level, how do we get through this life examples? And I hope as we go through these chapters, we can see some of these. Trey, I'll get you in on this. One of my favorites is the idea that a 2 or 3-fold cord is not quickly broken, right? We can find some encouragement, strength in each other in the here and now. There's all kinds of things we can do now, in addition to trusting God to take care of it. And that's what's great to think about all of the Bible, and including Ecclesiastes, is, hey, yes, our focus needs to be above. That's what it all boils down to. But we're not alone in the here and now either. It's not just all right, just try to survive and get through. It's no, God's going to watch out for you here too.
Yeah, and just to add to that, when we think of wisdom, maybe that's for some of us, maybe that's sort of this esoteric, just theoretical thing. And while there's some of that when we talk about biblical wisdom, certainly biblical wisdom is theological. It's something founded in God himself and coming to know him and understand him. But it is also very practical. And we look at a book like this, and it is about life under the sun. How do we deal with life under the sun? It's practical, and it's also ethical, moral. There's a proper way in which we should live. And so I think you're absolutely right. There's an everydayness to this book that we need to take into consideration. And just to jump off of something I've already said here, in some of these passages where it's talking about sort of this perspective that we have, where we stop and we take note of what God has given us and we delight in those things. I don't know, Greg, I don't know how much I have always appreciated everything that I've gotten, everything that I have, how much I've looked to God as the creator who has provided it and thanked him for that and delighted in that. And I think that's part of what this time, you mentioned the toilet paper not on sale at my grocery store time. I think that's part of what this time has afforded us, is to say nothing about the tragedy that's going on in the world and or anything like that. But part of the lesson that we can learn is to take a step back and realize there's a lot of things that God has given me that I haven't been thankful for. And what has been so cool is to see so many people they've started creating different piles of things that are important and piles of things that really aren't all that important, and appreciating God for what he has given. And so I just need to take more stock of what God has given me and be thankful for it and really enjoy it. And so I think about all the busyness, and part of this book is about just being busy and diving into things as much as you can. And then at the end of the day, you come to ask, well, where's the meaning in all of that? And so he talks in chapter 2, for instance, he talks a lot about spending time with your family and sharing meals together and enjoying that time that you have. And so maybe some of the things that we thought were important before all of this started, maybe we've come to realize, hey, those things aren't really as important. And we can be thankful to God more and delight in the things that really, truly matter.
Yeah, and I think even in a basic way, things that we overlook, to your point on like working in general, like we tend to kind of swing one of two directions. Work is all encompassing, all important, or no, it's just something you do to kind of provide for your family. Well, God put joy in our labor. We're going to see that. The writer says you should be enjoying that. But life without that would have a big gaping hole in it. I mean, Andrew, you have 3 kids and another one on the way. As you look at that, I mean, when you work, it's great. And I know you enjoy preaching and teaching, but how do you balance the idea of knowing that, you got a limited time with your family, but you also have the work of God to do? How do you balance the here and now with the more important things? How do you do that looking at Ecclesiastes as a background?
Well, I think it's a great question, because I think one of the things that we can be tempted to do sometimes is almost fall into a trap of thinking that the physical doesn't matter. And I think we can misunderstand what the Bible talks about with that. There is a lot of comparisons drawn between, the fleshly and the physical and the worldly and the spiritual, and always the spiritual takes higher priority. But I think we can almost fall into a trap of thinking that that means the physical doesn't matter. And in
Right.
fact, that's one of the big heresies of the first and second century, is that idea of Gnosticism, that idea that the only things that mattered were the spiritual, and the flesh was a trap the body would be gotten away from. And that's really missing the point of what Ecclesiastes is saying. Really, what all of the Bible is saying is that, yes, these things that are physical, these things that we live in this life, there is a sense that they're that vanity of vanities. And that Hebrew word there, havel, it's the idea of vapor. It's the idea of something it's very difficult to grasp. It's intransient. And that's kind of how we view this life right now, is that it's difficult to last. It fades very quickly. And that's one of the things that the Ecclesiastes writer is going to make the point of, is that, all the good things of this life, they're still going to fade. They're still going to fall away. And so his message is not those don't matter. His message is put those in their proper perspective. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges all people face, is balancing perspective. It's not, dismiss the physical entirely to purely focus on the spiritual. I think Jesus would have a lot of claim to say that that's not the case at all, that he came not just for spiritual sakes, but he came to heal the physical. He came to save people from their broken creation. And I think there's a balance there in finding that proper perspective. And I think that's what the author of Ecclesiastes is really concerned about, is helping us to understand, yes, these things are temporary, but enjoy them in their temporariness. Utilize them to the proper effect. Notice that ultimately these temporary physical things, those transcend into permanent spiritual things. I think that's a lot of what we see of our life here on earth, is that it's about molding us. It's about God, training us and creating us to be people who can dwell with him forever. That's the whole theme of the Old Testament, is God coming down to be with his people and creating a people that can dwell with him. And so our life here on earth is not inconsequential. It's enormously consequential, because it sets up the eternal that's to follow after. And I think that's that balance that Ecclesiastes strikes.
Excellent. Well said. And the idea of needing to find that purpose in the physical. Trey, I know you have a lot of thoughts on the creation element and the underpinning of Ecclesiastes that Gas kind of hit on there. Why don't you go ahead and hit us with that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's particularly true of the Old Testament writers, it's true especially of the wisdom writers as we think about them, is that these people, I mean, they drunk deeply from the wells of creation. They spent a lot of time mentally in the garden of Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and thinking about what God was doing in the world. And part of how this book, it seems, is shaped is to give an answer for what is creation all about? Why are we all here? What purpose do we have? And everything is going back in this book to God's ordering of things. And it's an ordering of things that we don't quite understand. We cannot quite grasp at times. Andrew, I'm sorry. He's got one of those last names that in college we called him Gas.
Just goes.
We're going to try to call him Andrew. It's going to be hard for Greg and I. But Andrew, one of the things that he mentioned earlier was this idea of hevel, or probably in most of our English translations, it's a vanity. Really, probably it's not so much meaninglessness as it is something that can't be grasped, something that can't be comprehended. It's like trying to grab onto the wind. You can't do it. And so part of our struggle as beings living in this world, we don't always know what God, the Creator, is up to. And that's part of what this book comes back to say time and time again, is that God is at work, and we may have some insight into what's going on, but oftentimes we don't. And so part of our job is not to grasp, it's not to take for ourselves, it's not to set ourselves up on our own wisdom. And I think that's part of what he's showing is folly here, trying to find our own way and our own wisdom. We don't do that. Rather, what we do is we trust in what God has said is good, what he has laid out in creation, his created order. And if we do that, and again, kind of going back to that idea of delight, I think we're going to find that this life, it is rich of meaning and it is rich of purpose. And it's not the emptiness that maybe from one perspective we might think that it is. And Greg, if I could hit on something you said earlier, just the fact that all of this book is about God. I think you mentioned, was it 37 times something that?
Yeah, at least.
That God has mentioned here in this book. And Andrew, to tie in something you were saying, everything that we do matters. So something that he's going through here is that, well, under the sun, life under the sun, what do we gain from our toil? And that idea of toil, that idea of work, absolutely goes back to Genesis 1, Genesis 2. God has given us dominion, given us authority, given us a vocation and occupation to be involved and to be busy with. What's the purpose of all of that? And at the end, the writer says, really, it all matters. Everything that you do matters, because it's all going to come under the judgment of the Creator God. Either it's going to serve to his glory, or it's going to, the contrast of that there is going to profane his name. And so the end of the matter, all has been heard, as the narrator wraps up there: fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, and every secret thing, whether good or evil. And so part of where this book is trying to push us is, am I going to live my life as a created being according to my created purpose, following my Creator, even when I don't quite understand all that's going on? But am I going to work and live for his glory in this world? Or am I going to go the conversive route and grasp for myself, take for myself, and try to make understanding out of all of it apart from him?
It's definitely going to be a challenge when you have that writer searching to what you said and finding the balance, right? That's really going to be one of these keys. As we move towards wrapping this up, why don't we all end with something that stands out in way of application? I know one for me, and we'll get to Andrew, and then Trey will give you the last word here. One for me is the idea that there is a time for everything. Ecclesiastes literally and metaphorically tells us there is a time for everything. A time to be glad, a time to be sad. That's difficult because a lot of times in our quest for that spiritual greatness, in a quest for that spiritual finality, we kind of think, well, there can't be any sadness because God. Well, it's true that God can get us through any sadness, but if you look in the Old and the New Testament alike, the heroes of faith were sad. Jesus was stressed. Jesus was in pain. Jesus was worried about things. Now, he's worried about things that are generally more important and higher level than what I worry about. I kind of worry about where I'm going to eat next, versus he's worried about facing all kinds of important things, thinking about people being a sheep without a shepherd, right? That's a priority lesson. But people have people problems. And this is part of what the writer's going to deal with is, people solutions don't work. God's solutions work, but I still have that problem in the meantime, right? What do I do when it's time to mourn? Well, mourn and be thankful that you had someone to mourn the time with. Right? Be thankful that there was a time of which juxtaposes with that mourning, that happiness, that happy period. And of course, even towards the end of the book, you have the idea of the growing old and the beautiful imagery there. And that's okay. There's a beauty at every stage of life. There's a beauty in everything we do, but we have to find, what did God put there? And the text is going to be striking as we get to the middle of it, that God placed value there. God allowed value to be in that work Trey alluded to, and to that idea of pressing on, even that I think all of us have touched on in different ways. And so just being real. Ecclesiastes is a real struggle. It's a real book, and I hope that we can really relate. Andrew, what's an application I think that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think part of what Trey was talking about with this idea of the creation, that's one of the things that I think we often don't fully appreciate the depth of how much that's referenced. You know, Genesis 1 and 1 through 3, it's not just the introduction of the books, the introduction of the whole Bible. It's introducing us to the main character of the story, who's ultimately God. And it's also introducing what the point of the book is, what the main plot line is. And it's that God creates this good world, and everything about it is good, including life. Physical life is a good thing. It is a blessing. It is a positive thing. Now we're then introduced to the conflict, which is the presence of sin and that corruption of man attempting to enthrone himself over God, and the devil doing likewise. That does corrupt everything. We see that, you know, even Paul talks about the corruption of creation, the physical earth, due to sin. And so that's the conflict. But the root understanding is that life is not the problem. Life is a gift from God. Life is a reflection of God. Life is a blessing. Sin is the problem. And that's what Christ came to solve. Christ did not come to solve the problem of physical life. He came to solve the problem of sin. And that's what we're going to see Ecclesiastes really dive into, is that, yes, life is filled with incongruency. It is filled with difficult things to understand. It's filled with frustrating things. It's filled with evil things. But life itself is not the problem. The problem is sin. And ultimately, Ecclesiastes points beyond itself in recognizing that that's the root problem that we can't solve. But thankfully, praise be to God, there is someone coming who can solve that root problem. And that's ultimately going to be the victory of the Bible. The conclusion of the Bible is that final day where man and creation and everything good will be cleansed of that corruption. And then there won't be the troubles of Ecclesiastes. There will only be the good things of life that will remain after that.
What a day that'll be.
Yeah.
Trey?
Yeah, Greg, I really appreciate what you said earlier when you were talking about just the different seasons, the different times that life gives to us. And I think that appreciating each season for what it is and for what it's doing, and how we can grow in that, I think is really important, especially, again, let's reference our toilet paper shortage time, or whatever it is that you phrased that as earlier. Maybe can't get the brand you want at the supermarket right now. It's just an issue in and of itself. Probably needs a book written about it. But anyways, when we think about time, it's something that we want to have control over. I think about all the planning that we do. I think about all the scheduling that we do, and when those things are thrown off, like they have been recently, that really shakes us.
Great point.
And part of what the book of Ecclesiastes is doing is saying, let go. There are cycles, there are seasons, and you're not in control of those. I'm not. God is in control of those. And so part of what I need to do is stop worrying about whether or not everything is going to work out right, whether or not everything is going to go exactly according to plan. And I need to do the best I can with what I've got right here and right now. I mean, there is certainly time for planning, and there is prudence in that, and the Bible speaks to those things. But there's also a time to say, I don't have as much control over this world as I think that I do. And so I'm just going to work for God's glory in the best way that I know how anyways. And so that may be the thing that I want to emphasize as we end here. This passage toward the end of the book, where he talks about casting your bread upon the waters, and you may find it in many days, and give your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth. We don't know what's coming, but we still need to get busy now. And, we've been thrown out of our schedules. Things have been sort of hectic, switching from morning pajamas to evening pajamas. I think there can be sort of a temptation just to sit back and let's wait until we've got some things figured out. Let's wait until all of this passes. And maybe this is sort of a hevel time for us. This is sort of a time of meaninglessness where I don't know, this time really doesn't count. Well, no, it does. Everything still matters. And so if we can, swallow the lack of control that we have, as this moment is showing us, get to work and glorify God, I think that's going to go a long ways in helping us to make sense out of the insensible that life often throws at us.
Yeah, man, the illusion of control was absolutely shattered. Good application. You stepped on some toes. Don't bring up my pajamas next time. God is in control. Definitely a theme of Ecclesiastes. Andrew, thanks for bringing us on. I really appreciate it. And Lord willing, I think we're going to try to get chapter 1 on Tuesday.
That's the plan.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thank you guys for making some time.
Absolutely. Good study, guys.
Thank you.
See you
Good
Tuesday.
talking with y'all.